Have you ever felt like someone looked right through you? Not in a poetic, I'm just a speck in this vast universe kind of way, but a very real invisibility, right here, right now. You're standing there, breathing, existing. Yet, to them, you're not worth a glance. That's the feeling Marcus Lane carried with him as he pushed open the door to Duval's Prime, the restaurant hailed as the pinnacle of fine dining for the elite. He said nothing, just stood at the entrance, letting the final chill of winter drift in behind him, brushing against the plush carpets and tuxedo-clad guests sipping red wine. Someone grimaced. A woman clutched her purse tighter. A server hurried toward him, not to greet, but to investigate where this man might have wandered in from. Marcus recognized that look. He'd lived in it, been rejected by it. He was in his early 60s, wearing a worn charcoal coat, unshaven, shoes cracked at the seams, holding a faded canvas bag. His posture was upright, his walk steady, but no one noticed that. They only saw the surface. And that surface said, "This man doesn't belong here." At the reception desk, a young man named Brent adjusted his tie and approached with practiced precision, the kind of voice trained to blend friendliness with authority. "Good evening, sir," Brent said, not bowing, not smiling. "I'm afraid we don't serve people like you." Marcus looked at him for a second, not surprised, not angry. Just replied in a voice coarse with years of restraint. "I'd like a table. I have a reservation." Brent tilted his head, his smile stretched into something smirking. "I'm sure you don't. Please leave." Marcus didn't argue. He reached into his coat and pulled out an old flip phone, the kind most young people have only seen in documentaries. He pressed 3 buttons. A voice answered instantly, without greeting. "Initiate emergency protocol. Name, Marcus Lane. Location, Duval's Prime." 5 minutes later, the restaurant manager, a man named Elliot, dashed across the main hall as if someone had just declared bankruptcy. He stopped abruptly, short of breath, glanced at Brent, then turned to Marcus, face draining of color as if he'd seen a ghost. "Mr. Lane, I truly didn't." Marcus said nothing. He held up a platinum membership card with his name engraved, then nodded. "Where's my table?" Brent stared at the card, then at the man he had just been kicked out. The restaurant fell utterly silent. Even the wine glass in the hand of the millionaire at table 3 seemed to stop trembling. Elliot stammered, "You'll be seated immediately. VIP window table." Marcus nodded, said nothing more. He walked past Brent, like stepping through a shadow. The shadow of a past self who had once been rejected just like this. Seated in the soft leather chair, Marcus didn't order wine, nor any high-end dish. He asked only for a cup of black tea and a plate of grilled vegetables. The server hesitated, confused. Marcus just smiled. "I keep it simple. Flavor doesn't live in the price tag, you know?" The server wasn't sure whether to smile back or apologize. Marcus looked out the window. The city lights had begun to glow, casting reflections across the glass like a soft blur. He saw himself in it, a graying, angular shadow of a man. But inside him, every detail of the room was vivid. The background music is slightly too loud, the uneven air conditioning, the way staff glanced at a guest's outfit before offering a smile, every tiny thing, because he had once lived in those details. Marcus Lane was not homeless, not a stray diner, and not lost. He was the co-founder of the Duval restaurant empire, worth hundreds of millions, spanning 6 states with over 40 locations. His name was on every contract, every charter. But he also knew, when a system grows big enough, it starts forgetting the small things. He wasn't here to dine, not to check sales. He came to check whether the reason he built all of this was still alive. Brent still stood behind the host desk, face like polished marble. Elliot whispered urgently in his ear, eyes sharp with a reprimand. Guests tried to continue their meals, but everyone was listening. No one had imagined the man they just dismissed was the soul of this place. But for Marcus, this wasn't the first time he'd been dismissed. At 14, he'd once walked into a restaurant wearing a donated shirt, hoping to buy a meal for his mom's birthday with money earned from washing cars. The reply he got that day wasn't far from today's. But back then, he had no phone, no power. Nothing but dignity is crushed under someone else's judgment. From that day on, he swore, if he ever built a place that served food, it would never judge anyone by how they looked at the door. Now, at the very center of the empire he built, he saw that story repeating itself. He finished his meal and rose silently, but before stepping out he turned and looked at Brent. Not with anger, just a silent question. Who did you think I was? Then he walked out, leaving behind a room thick with unspoken shame, as if the whole space had just lost its breath. That night, Marcus didn't return to his suburban estate. He rented a modest room in a 3-star hotel just a few blocks from the restaurant. Not to save money, but to stay close to what had just happened. To hold the chill, the stares, the voices, exactly as they were at Duval's prime when he crossed a door that should have always been his. He removed his coat and sat at the small desk under the amber glow of a cheap lamp. On the worn wooden surface, a small scratch ran like a crow's foot. He pulled out a second phone, this one used for nothing personal. It connected directly to Duval's internal systems, databases, HR logs, anonymous reports, and guest complaint records. He didn't use the search bar. He scrolled line by line because he knew. What matters most is often hidden where no one looks. He started with Brent. Brent's name appeared in at least 12 internal guest reports in the last 6 months. One said, "The male host didn't listen." Another wrote, "The person who greeted me looked at me like I didn't deserve to touch the silverware." One was more detailed. "It's the first time in my life that sitting at a fancy table made me want to leave, just because of how they looked at my old coat." Marcus read every word slowly, as if swallowing back his memories, the kind he once wrote in letters no one ever read. But what haunted him most was data from other branches. In Atlanta, a waitress was suspended for seating an old man in plastic slippers near the wine bar. In Dallas, a dark-skinned guest was asked to prepay in case the card declined. In Los Angeles, a single mother took her son out to celebrate graduation. She documented the night they were ignored for 35 minutes. She didn't ask for compensation. She only wrote, "I just want my son to never feel like he's worth less than the people at the next table." Marcus pressed his hand to the table, trying to keep old pain from spilling into tremors. Duval wasn't built for the rich. It was built for the kind, to see if, in a world obsessed with appearing elite, there were still people who knew how to treat those who never got called by their name. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the main Duval headquarters in Manhattan. No one knew he was coming. He didn't call ahead, he didn't need an appointment or permission. He walked in with his keycard. No one stopped him. In conference room 4, the one with floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking Bryant Park, he sat alone and made 3 phone calls. Short. Director. He summoned the head of human resources, the director of staff training, and the regional chief of operations for the Northeast sector. They arrived within minutes, tense, buttoning jackets, trying not to look rattled. Because when Marcus Lane called, it wasn't just business. He didn't rise. Didn't use the whiteboard. Didn't lecture. He simply opened his laptop and projected a screenshot onto the glass wall. A single guest comment. I used to think Duval was the kind of place where the moment you walked in, you'd be seen, where someone would call you by name and you'd feel human. But that night I was just a problem to be managed. Marcus turned the screen toward them, said nothing. He let the silence settle, then closed the laptop, folded his hands. His voice was steady, but it sank deep. I don't want another analysis. I want action. He looked each of them in the eyes. I want Duval to shut down, entirely, for 7 days. Every location, every department, no service, no business. A long pause. The room felt tighter. The director of operations leaned forward cautiously. Mr. Lane, I understand the intent, but a nationwide closure will trigger panic. Shareholders will revolt. The press might spin this the wrong way. Marcus nodded calmly. If they invested only in appearances, they invested in the wrong company. He continued, firmer. Yes, we'll lose money, but that's not the real danger. The real danger is that we lose who we are, and no one notices. No one disagreed, because they knew. News spread within hours. It lit up business networks and trended across social media. Duval shuts down nationwide for 7 days to rebuild its culture. Reactions were split. Some called it bold, others said it was spin. But the ones who had once felt invisible in places like Duval, they understood. It wasn't a performance. A former server posted, "A manager once told me not to be too friendly with guests who looked like construction workers. Today, I read this news and cried." A former guest wrote, "I don't need an apology. Just don't let what happened to me happen to anyone else." Maybe you've never stepped foot inside a Duval, but maybe you've walked through a door and felt the shift in the air, the subtle glances, the mechanical smile that vanishes the second you look away, the feeling that no matter how carefully you dressed, you still didn't fit the mold. If this story reminds you of something you've lived, you don't have to explain it. Just share what you feel. And maybe someone else who's been quiet for far too long will finally feel seen. That night, Marcus left headquarters without giving a press statement. No cameras, no press release, no announcement. He drove himself to an old satellite training center in the suburbs of Jersey. No luxury, no branding. Just a building with creaky floors, a coffee machine that sputtered more than it brewed, and a training whiteboard stained by years of erased lessons. He called for a meeting. No executives, no PR team, just frontline staff, hosts, servers, kitchen assistants, valets, the people who shook hands in the rain, who smiled while their feet ached, who had seen firsthand how respect could vanish the second someone didn't look the part. They arrived curious. A few were wary, most were unsure why they were invited. But when they left, something in them had shifted. Not because someone spoke at them, but because they were finally heard. Marcus didn't sit at the head of the table. He stood by the coffee machine and poured each person a cup. Then began, "You don't need to know who I am. I just want to know, if your job no longer lets you feel human, why?" A young woman answered first. Her name was Amanda, formerly from the Georgia branch. Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes did. "We're told to focus on high-tier guests and not waste time on people who might not tip. One day, I spent extra time talking to an elderly man in a worn veteran's jacket. Management pulled me aside, said I needed to prioritize appropriately. A young man, Malik, from the Bronx, chimed in. We're trained to smile, but not to mean it. I remember a little girl. It was her birthday. Her mom politely asked for a window seat. The manager said, what difference does it make? They were seated next to the restroom. No one interrupted, no one dismissed. Each story chipped away at the image Duval had once polished to perfection. Marcus didn't take notes, just listened. Sometimes he nodded, sometimes he pressed a hand over his chest, like keeping something from shattering. At the end, he stood, walked to the stained whiteboard, picked up a faded marker, and wrote 6 words. "We forgot why we started this." He turned to them. His voice didn't rise, but no one looked away. "We're not lacking skills, we're lacking reason." He paused. "I'm creating a new division. It won't track profit. It won't file performance reports. Its only mission is to watch how we treat each other." He looked around. "And I want one of you to lead it." No one spoke, but everyone knew that night they hadn't just been heard, they had been trusted to become the gatekeepers of what's right. Day 4. Marcus did something no CEO had done before. He sent handwritten cards to every frontline employee across the entire Duval system, from night shift dishwashers to parking valets, from security guards to janitors. No email blasts, no HR filters, just a small note, each carrying the same line. "If you've ever felt unfairly treated while working at Duval, send a message to this address. I'll be the only one reading it." In less than 48 hours, over 700 responses arrived. Some were typed, some scribbled on notepads. Some came folded inside food delivery bags, stained with coffee or ketchup. But every single one carried something no metrics ever could: truth. Marcus read each one. One said, "I've worked 3 back-to-back night shifts. Not once has anyone asked if I'm okay. I forgot what it feels like to be seen." Another, "My manager told me, your face makes customers nervous. Smile less." And one more, quiet and devastating. "I just want someone to know. I tried." Maybe you've been there too. Doing a job not because you love it, but because you need to survive. Still, you show up. You treat others with respect. You hold on to dignity, even when no one offers it back. And if you've ever wondered whether that mattered, maybe you're exactly the kind of person who keeps a place like Duval human. Day 5. Duval's internal announcement system released a message no one expected. "We are launching a new, independent unit, Human Dignity Audit, a division with full authority to investigate any location, override any policy, or suspend any leader if there is evidence of disrespect toward staff or guests. The division will be led by Amanda Trujillo, former server Georgia branch." The news spread quickly, and the world reacted with disbelief. A luxury dining empire, once a symbol of elite exclusivity, was now placing power in the hands of someone who had once poured water and bussed tables. To some, it was radical. To others, reckless. But Marcus Lane knew, no one understands dignity more deeply than those who've had to fight for theirs every single day. Days of heavy rain swept across the city. Marcus sat alone in his office. Letters still coming in. Media requests are stacked high. The board's inquiries piling up. But he didn't touch them. Instead, he reached for something tucked deep beneath the pile. A crumpled envelope, yellowed and bent, with no name on the return. It had no fancy seal, no heading. Just a small note inside, written in neat purple ink. "Do you remember the person you once kicked out of the diner on Lenox Avenue in 1987? Marcus froze. The air thickened. The lights above hummed louder. He felt his pulse in his fingers. He knew. He knew exactly who the letter was about, and the part of himself it had come for. 1. The first small restaurant Marcus ever opened with 2 friends when he was 23. One summer afternoon, a teenage boy in a torn t-shirt walked in and asked politely if there was any food left over. Marcus, overwhelmed, bitter from a major client walking out that same morning, had snapped. He told the boy, "We're not a soup kitchen, get out." The boy didn't argue. He just looked at him. No anger, no fear, just a cold kind of stillness. Marcus never spoke about that moment, never told anyone. He thought he'd buried it. But here it was. He turned the letter over. There was one more line. "This time, would you open the door?" The next day, Marcus returned to that same block on Lenox Avenue. The diner was long gone. Now it was a laundromat, but the wooden door was still there. So was the chipped brick step near the gutter. He sat on a bench across the street. Waited. Nothing. Not for an hour, not for 3. Just as dusk started painting the windows purple, a man walked by. Mid-50s, simple shirt, worn shoes, face weathered by years, and familiar. The man stopped. Looked at Marcus, didn't speak, just nodded. Marcus stood up. No formalities, no rehearsed lines, just 4 quiet words. "I remember that day." The man smiled. "So do I, but I didn't write the letter." Marcus blinked. "Then who did?" "My daughter. She saw the news about you, saw what you were changing. She asked if I had forgiven you. I told her no one ever said sorry." A long pause. Not awkward, just necessary. The kind of silence that knows pain, but also the passage of time. Marcus reached into his coat and handed him a small folded paper. On it, his handwriting. "If I could go back, I'd open the door. Not just to the diner, but to the part of myself I've kept locked away." The man took it, didn't read it. He looked Marcus in the eye and said, "Late is better than never." They didn't hug, they didn't shake hands, they didn't even promise to stay in touch. They just stood there. 2 men who had once occupied opposite sides of a single, cruel moment. Now, simply sharing the same sidewalk under the same rain-washed sky. No one needed to own the story anymore. It had finally come full circle. Day 7. Marcus didn't return to Duval's Prime. He didn't go back to the Manhattan headquarters. He didn't even return to his home. Instead, he visited a small house on the corner of a Harlem street. A place no one in the corporate world remembered, because it was from a time when no one knew his name. The house was old now. Paint chipped from the wooden door. Vinyl tiles in the hallway curling at the edges. But right in the middle of all that imperfection was something whole. The memory of a young man with a quiet dream, to one day build a place where people could sit side by side, not because of status, not because of labels, but because they were simply people. Marcus leaned against the wall that once froze his back during winter. He didn't come to reminisce. He came to do what he had feared most, to let that dream go and pass it on. 1 week later, Duval reopened. No red carpet, no champagne, no headlines. At each location by the front door, there was simply a small wooden sign. "We forgot how to listen. Starting today, you will remind us." And just beneath it, a small box where anyone, guest or employee, could leave a note. No names are required. No polish is needed, just truth. At the first Duval location Marcus ever opened in the 1980s, the one that had become his deepest regret, he rebuilt it. Not into another restaurant, but into a new kind of space, the Center for Dignity and Service. Run not by shareholders, not by executive chefs, but by the very people who had once been overlooked. Amanda, the server reprimanded for being too friendly, now wrote the center's first training curriculum. Malik, the young man once told to smile less, now stood in front of new trainees, teaching them how to smile with meaning, not from habit, but from truth. And Marcus, he no longer sat in a chairman's seat, no longer signed contracts, no longer referred to company decisions as mine. Now, he just visited branches quietly, unannounced. Sometimes he'd sit in a corner, order tea, watch the room, not to check the wine list, not to judge the presentation, but to observe one simple thing. Did the person at the door open their heart before they opened the menu? At Duval's prime, the very restaurant where he was once told he didn't belong, there now hung a framed portrait behind the host desk, not of Marcus, but of every employee side by side, faces arranged like a tapestry, a new wall of honor. As Marcus once said in his final internal address, "It took me a lifetime to learn that no one is the soul of a company. The true soul is how we treat people who have nothing to offer us." Maybe you've walked past a restaurant like Duval. Maybe someone looked you up and down. Maybe your shoes, your jacket, your silence were enough for someone to decide you didn't belong. Maybe you've been the one in the back wiping down tables. Maybe you've left a shift so tired you forgot your name. Maybe, for a long time, you've just been hoping that someone would finally say, "I see you. I know you're trying." And if Marcus's story touched something in you, some buried moment, some forgotten ache, then maybe stories like this shouldn't stop at one video. Because not every story gets an apology, not every ending gives the quiet ones the spotlight. But here, those are the only stories that matter. Marcus stepped out of the restaurant. No one followed him, no cameras, no applause, just a man, older now, but for the first time in decades walking lighter than his age.